So yeah, coming back to today's session, we are going to work on test cases. As I said, we will introduce a little more technicality. In fact, technicality does not normally have to be bad or complex for that matter. It is just that a little bit of technicality or, laying some ground rules or establishing a process will help enhance the process and makes everything easier for us to um, work with and handle things in a better manner. Since we're discussing the test cases concept, what we're going to do is we'll spend the majority of today's class around test cases. If we want to do a little bit of backtracking into SDLC and kind of figuring out where we are at, we are 100% done with the test planning phase. We are working our way through the test design phase. So in that process, we have taken a look at the functional specification review process, and then we have also discussed the test scenario writing. So now we're working with the test case writing process. So once the test case writing process is 100% done and then we are all set with it, we can say that the test design phase is complete. So today pretty much we'll try and finish the test design phase to the extent possible. However, there are one or two more topics more that we have to deal with in the test design phase, which we will do tomorrow. So starting tomorrow, we'll discuss the test execution, and then going forward, we'll do defects and everything. So that's how we are going to conduct this week, and those are the topics that we are going to focus on this week. So today, particularly test cases, which is the remainder of the test design phase. So again, there are few test data or test case optimization techniques. Now, what this really means is, team, is everybody able to hear me? Syed, if you have of course it will be counterproductive if I talk because he cannot hear me. Just give me a minute, team. Okay, so today we are going to do that, and then so we'll discuss some test data or test optimization techniques. Now, that does sound technical, but what it really means is, so whenever we're talking about optimization or coming up with an optimum solution, we are looking at minimizing the work and maximizing the results. So we all know that given the luxury of time, we can actually test indefinitely. We can test indefinite number of test conditions, but we are all dealing with a certain specific limited time and the limited scope of what we can achieve in that particular time. So it is really not about doing a lot of work. It is about choosing our work smartly, picking up those test conditions that will appropriately or in an effective manner test your application and be able to identify all the issues. So test data or test case optimization techniques are few techniques that are widely used in the industry for various reasons, to reduce the amount of data that you're putting in, to maximize the results and all that. So there are 5 of those. As you can see on my screen, there's boundary value analysis, equivalence partitioning, error guessing, state transition diagrams, decision tables. There's also one other related topic, which is risk analysis, or you could call that risk-based testing. So we will discuss that today. And if time permitting, we have a traceability matrix. Now, my experience says that we won't be able to finish traceability matrix today, but that's just a topic that I have because each batch works at their own pace. With some batches, I get to do traceability matrix, but with most I don't. So let's target for these 3 main topics today, and also the stress testing. Now, we have established how stress testing is a non-functional kind of testing, or in some cases may be functional. Now, how is this applicable to QAs, and what kind of stress testing requirements do we have to keep in mind? Do we do that or not? And if we have to do it, how do we go about it are few things. Again, theoretically we'll take a look at that and try to establish some ground rules around that. So this is how we're going to break down today's session. So I know there's been a lot of delay, and I really thank you for all your patience. So let's not waste any more time, and we'll go to the test cases. Now before we get there, I'll have to tell you that the turnaround for the assignment has been amazing. I think it is working for most of you to actually send me the assignments at the end of the week as opposed to every day, which works just fine for me. But from your assignments, I kind of figured out there are a few main areas that that are consistently going wrong for most of you. So that gives me, an idea that today's session is just right on time, because these kind of common, inconsistencies can be raised out when we try to define and get a little bit of a technical understanding on the concept of test case writing. So as always, I'll just get my Excel sheet and we'll get right started. So we know what columns are in a test case, right? So there's a test case ID, a test case description. Now these two have a static role to play. So when I say static, which means that during test execution, these are not the steps that get applied on your AUT. So these are just for us to identify the test case and to actually set a little bit of reference. So these you can call are the header columns. Now header columns does not have to be confined to these two. There can be other things like what component does this test case belong to, who is the tester who has documented this test case, who is the tester who has reviewed the test case. Or if there is a tester who is going to execute the test case. So any of this information or more, anything that you see fit can go into the header columns. So other than these two, everything else is optional. You can include as many as you like depending on your need. Now the other columns that are not static per se, but are the steps that get performed on your application start with the precondition step. Now precondition is actually a very beneficial column. One is it sets the context. It will give you an idea of, so this is a sort of checklist that you need to satisfy to begin the testing. So whatever is part of the precondition column, those are things that you need to be able to satisfy before you move on to actual test steps. So one, this precondition acts like an entry criteria checkbox. And the other thing that precondition can really help us with is reduce repetition. How does this happen? Now I did tell a few of you in your assignments that I'm going to discuss this in the class, so let me go ahead. Now I'm going to not write all the columns, so just for the example I'm going to write the test case from the precondition itself. So now one problem that I saw was Chrome is launched and Karguruji's site is logged into. So if this is the precondition, the next thing that you have to start your test step is from an action that precedes subsequently follows this. So if you've written that the precondition is that the browser is launched and that the site is logged into already, it does not make sense to write enter the URL and then providing the URL in the test data. Then it does not make sense if you just say enter the username. So because this is a redundancy, this is a repetition, because in the precondition itself it's saying that the site is launched and it is logged into. So writing these steps again is a repetition. So try not to do that. Try to use your precondition step in order to minimize the number of steps that you have in your test case. Okay, so if this was a test case for admin, so if this was a test case for administrator country adding, okay, let's just say for example if this is what we are trying to achieve, and the test step says launch Chrome, so no preconditions necessary. All that we are saying is that admin login details should be available. So this is also, in this case, it becomes static because the details have to be available outside the AUT, not necessarily, something that you do on the AUT to get them. So precondition may or may not be static. So you will reap the best benefits of this column if you actually keep it dynamic, if you use it for dynamic text. And here's what I mean. So launch Chrome or any other browser to that effect, enter the URL, and then click on admin login, enter admin username, enter admin password, click sign in. So once the sign in happens, click on add country, enter the country name, click OK. So the corresponding data would be, so you would launch Chrome, you would launch the URL, you would provide an admin username. So this one, nothing here. So this, you would enter username, password, country name, sorry, and then you click OK. And the corresponding expected result would be that, see, we'll talk about test steps in a little bit, so let me just finish writing that. If this is your test case, let's say the next test case is about admin delete country. So what we are pretty much doing is we are performing all of these steps in the exact same manner, and here choose the country of choice to be deleted. So here you would write the name. Let's say if you want to delete the same thing that you've added, and then click on delete. So maybe there will be a confirmation message. Following the confirmation message, country will be removed from the list. So again, if there is like a, editing country, so on and so forth, you would have the same steps. Now here is where you can use the precondition column to your advantage. What you can say is, Karguruji site is launched and the admin is logged in. So that would eliminate all of these steps for you. Now, however, you still have to test the login once. So write one test case for admin login, keep it separate, and then from the next one onwards, make that the precondition, so you don't have to repeat these steps over and over again. So what is the problem with repetition, you might think, because it is just copying and pasting. One is it is not time efficient, and the second thing is, see, even when you copy and paste with the best intentions and the most focus, copy and paste is the place that is most prone to errors that happen because of overlooking a small detail, because it somehow does not fail to capture the interest of the tester, and this is where a lot of mistakes happen. So this is how you can use the precondition column to write just once and launch your application from wherever you would like. So that's how you can reduce repetition, and if you look at it carefully, what you're trying to set here is you're trying to set the state of the application. Now what does this mean? And this is a common term, and especially if you go into automation, state of the application is something that you will hear over and over again. Now what does state of the application mean? So right now on my screen you're seeing like go to training, correct? So in the go to training, so this is the screen that you're seeing right now. This page has some properties. It has this URL. It has a certain content that is displaying. So this is an instance of this page. So this is an occurrence of this page, and it has certain properties. Now if I want to see who has registered, I'll simply click on this link. Now, do you think the state of this page has changed? One is the page itself has changed. It has caused you to move into a completely new page. Now let me show you a simpler example. Let's say there is a gmail.com login page. Okay, so here what I'm doing is I will not enter an email ID, I'll not enter a password. So if you see, the URL of this page is so and so, an X URL. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to enter any username and password. I'll simply click sign in. Now the URL might still be the same, the page might still be the same, but the state of this page is different, because this instance has this property that this is highlighted and it is notifying me that enter your email address. So an instance of the application is a state of an application, and some operations, they cause a change of state in your application. So how is that important? Now you will have to yes, but Puneet, you're right. So if I'm just writing that, the admin is logged in, I have to simply remove all this and say click on add country. Start from there. Okay. Now when we talk about the state of the application, it just means that what instance do you need to start it from. So by writing something like this, saying that Karguruji site is launched and the admin is logged in, you're setting the expectation that the state of the application before I begin the test should be this. Make sense, team? So this is a column that you can leverage in multiple ways, and the more you use this to your benefit, the more you'll reduce the work on yourself. Now if you ask me, is it totally wrong to actually follow this method and even include these steps? No. It is your personal preference. It's just an optimized method that is available, and you could try this option if you would like. So that is about the precondition step. And precondition is never an instruction to the user. So this is especially for Tina, because we seem to have like a difference of point of opinion based on yesterday's assignment. Now what I'm trying to tell you here is, so one of the precondition will not be that the tester should learn how to perform a car sale. Now this does not become a valid precondition, because preconditions are only for the state of the application, for the data, the kind of prerequisites, but they are not targeting towards the user, nor are you instructing a user on how to get ready for it. So it's just about the test case. So never give instructions in in your preconditions. Instructions are always for your test steps. All right, and also test cases are going to be executed by testers. So it's kind of redundant to say that the testers should learn how to use the software. So that's kind of a prerequisite for testing itself, not necessarily for a precondition. So for additional due diligence, if your team is following that, if it's a practice that you want to, follow across your team and see how it works for you, then by all means give it a try, but that's not the standard process is all I'm saying. The next thing is the test step. So the test steps, there are of three types. One is input steps. Then there is the steps that cause a state transition. And the third one is the validation or action or trigger steps. Now input steps are straightforward. So anywhere you're providing an input to the to the application in the form of a step, those are your input steps. So I'm just going to color code them red so that it will be easier for us to figure it out. So here enter URL, that's an incorrect step actually. Enter URL and click go. So this is a combination of both data entry and also an action where you're actually performing a certain function on your application. So as a common rule, independent data entry steps will not have expected result because they do not cause a change in the state of the application, right? On the other hand, there are steps that cause a change in the application. Say for example, I'm launching Chrome, so it's making the browser open. So when I'm entering a URL and clicking go, it's actually taking me to a web page. So what used to be just an open browser, empty open browser, is now the home page. And then when I click on admin login, for here, look, let me log out, start from the beginning. So here when I'm clicking on admin login, what's happening is the page is changing. So the complete URL is changing. It's moving to a new page. So there are two kinds of state transition steps. One is it will cause the page to completely change, or it will cause some kind of change to happen inside the page itself. Like, the enter your email address notification thing. So for steps that will cause a state transition, it is preferred that you enter the expected result. Now, why am I saying that it's preferred? So you might be wondering, is it really optional to give the expected result or not for each and every step? Now, some teams, they follow the process that instead of writing all of these, I'm just going to delete this for a second. I'll restore it in a bit. So what they do is they merge the whole thing and they have one expected result at the end of it. So when I click OK, the combined expected result for the entire test case would be So here, all the intermediary state transitions are not taken into account. Now, if you ask me which one is the right way, I would say there is no right or wrong way. It's just about what people are more comfortable doing. But if it is up to me, if I'm the one who needs to make this decision, then I would say go with the latter. Because the reason why the latter approach is a better approach is because let's say at this point of time the admin page is not getting displayed. So here I can say that this step is fail, or it's not working as intended, and next time I take a look at this test case, I will know exactly where this test case has failed to perform, where there was a problem with this test case. But then if you follow this method, then it is not apparent. So that's one of the main issues I have with the latter method. But then it's up to you. So if it is, as I said, if I have to give out a common methodology, then I would say this one, and write a test, expected result for every step that will cause a state transition to happen. Usually data entry steps will not cause a state transition to happen. The rest of them definitely would. Now finally, validation or action or trigger. Now this is very, very important because at the end of the day, the test case has to check for something. So if it is just going on entering data, see for example, if your test case stops here. Sorry. Oh, this is happening because it's a merged cell. Okay. So if your test case stops here, like, entering the country name, one second. So if we were following the former method where we write, the test, an expected result for every test step that causes a change in the state of the application. Now, never leave your test case or never end your test case with a data entry step. Because following this, something has to happen, some trigger has to happen, some validation has to happen, because at the end of this test case, you will have to make sure that the test objective which is there, that has to be checked 100%. So for that to be checked, there is always a validation or action or trigger point. Now let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Let's say you have a site like, Google, where you're trying to create an account, and then you have a site like Amazon.com where you're trying to create an account as well. So account creation, pretty much the same thing. Or let me take an example, Walmart. This thing uses very few fields, so that might be easier. Now if my test case is this one, create an account with an empty last name field. So this is my test I'm trying to perform. This is a negative test because the account creation process should not pass when I'm trying to create an account with an empty last name page. And let's say this is my test scenario, creating account 01. So if this is the sort of testing that we are trying to do, if it is in Google account, here's what I'll do. I'll just enter my first name, move to the next field, and move to the next field. So as soon as I moved to the third field, which is entering the username, the state of this application changes. Now, is this any state change? No, this is specific to my test objective. Now, at this point of time, I kind of understand that if I leave or if I move out of the last name field without entering any data, without entering any information in there, then my validation for last name, mandatory last name field happens then and there, right? So that is one point as opposed to what happens in the Walmart page. Now let's say I'm trying to create an account on the Walmart page. And here's what I would do. I would now enter my first name, not enter the last name, the exact same thing that I did for the Google accounts page, and then I would enter a email address. Wow, this might be tough because okay, so I'll enter the email address, and then I'll choose a password. And then I'll click on continue. So only when I do all of these steps and then click on continue, only then will it show me the validation. So it is pretty much the same test, same action that I'm trying to do, same target, same objective. It's just that different sites, different applications behave differently. So what is different here? The validation. The point at which this page checks for whether or not the last name is entered is different. So for every operation, there definitely is at least one validation action or trigger step that has to be mandatorily present in your application. Now the reason why I'm mentioning this is there was one assignment today where you're checking for again, it's the same create account page. And then if you enter the password, so it'll ask you to confirm the password, correct? So if two of them mismatch, then that should display an error message. So this is the test objective. Now this is a great test objective, perfectly valid. But then the test ended at enter the password 1, enter password 2. And then immediately the expected result was that the passwords do not match messages displayed. Now what's wrong with this? This test is ending with a data entry step. So here, if this page behaves like the Google account page, at least you have to move to the next move to the next field, and then the validation happens, and that is where you can check the expected result. But if this is like the Walmart page, you'll have to enter all the other information and click on sign up. So any of these two things should have happened depending on the behavior of the site. And it is very important to understand what will cause the validation or the action or the trigger point for your test case. So without at least one validation point, your test case is not valid. So always keep this point in mind. Make sure that the last step in your test case is definitely a validation point. Otherwise, it will just be you writing some steps without being able to achieve the target of the test case. Are you all with me, team? Does all of this make sense? Okay, any questions? Now you might ask me, if we are writing the test cases based on a functional requirement document, which pretty much does not tell me what the validation or the action trigger point is, so if we don't know how to, I mean, if we have I mean, if your question is, so if we just take a look at the FRD document, will we know what the validation or the action point is? Now that we have two applications, it is easy to play around with it a little bit and figure out that what the validation point might be. But in real time, how would we know? In most software development teams, you would definitely have what is called the we would definitely have what is called sorry about that, team. I'm a little distracted because one of our participants seemed to have a problem. So all right, sorry about that. So most of the software teams will have something called a use case document. Now the reason why I say most is because not all of them have it. And the reason why most of them might not have it, I mean the few of them who don't have a use case document is probably because it's an agile project and they don't want to write a lot of documentation. So in extreme cases, you probably will not have like a use case document, but most often you would. Now this is how a use case document would look like. Now this does look a little complicated, but it's nothing really complicated. All this is actually, let's take a little bit of a detour from our test cases and try and understand what use cases are. I know that we talked about this briefly in the previous sessions, but let's spend a little time on this. Now, use case, again, I'm a big believer that any technical term can be really understood when you actually take a look at its literal meaning. So when you're talking about when you have like a, say cell phone, now how would you use it? You could use it for alarm clocks, you could use it for, you could actually set a password, you could actually make phone calls, you can browse the internet. So there are all of these things you can do. So how do you use an object called cell phone? That becomes its use case. Now in the context of software applications, it will not be that broad a scope. So when you look at a cell phone, it is like one big product. So in the software world also, the software itself or the AOT itself is one big product. So use cases are not written at a product level, they are written at a function level. So for example, if you take the cell phone application example itself, you probably want to write a use case about how alarm works. So you would write detailed steps about what situations you can use this in. So you can set a snooze, you can set a time, you can set multiple alarms, you can set maybe different tones to wake you up, different songs you can choose to play and different, snooze levels. So, I mean, you know all of this. So there's a lot of ways in which this can be used. Now, use case, so whenever the word case comes into picture, it's always about practical instruction based. So use case will tell you how a particular function is going to be used and how is the key here. So how a particular function is going to be used and then who? Actors. So sometimes the actors thing I can explain best in the cell phone terms again. See, when the cell phone is in use, you have two kinds of things you can do. One is you can lock it, and when the phone is still locked, there are things that you can do, like you can make an emergency call. You can actually launch a camera to take pictures without you unlocking. So here when you look at these actors are one is password protected registered user, and the other user, if you can call them guest, the guest can perform these operations. So the actors is also plays a key role. So that is why use case will not just define how a particular function has to be used, the different situations it can be used. It will also give you an idea of who can use it. So putting all that information into this perspective, so if this is a use case, so these are use cases that we have written for the eBay application. Actually, I'm proud to say this is actually written by one of our students because he was training to become BA, so he took the time, did his research, and he's actually come up with this document. I must say it's a great one. So this is so he's taken the eBay application. So if you're trying to register for an account or a create account page, now who are the actors here? Of course there are no actors because anybody can register for a page. So there's just one sort of actor or one kind of user, which is any customer. And he's actually broken this down into what actions would the actor do and what actions would the system do. So when the user clicks on create account, what does the system do? The system will display various dialog boxes prompting the user to fill so and so information. So when you're writing your test case, this is how you would know that there's a name field, email address field. There is another email address field to rewrite it one more time. There's a mobile number field, password field, and a reconfirmation of a password field. So this is how it will tell you what fields to incorporate in your test plan, and test case, and what kind of input do you have to get prepared with. And then the user will enter all the details as requested by this user and system and hit the create account button. So you see, this is how you'll know that this is going to be your validation step. Similarly, for the sign in, again, this is explained in detail. For viewing the account, what action will the user do, what action will the system do, all of this will be detailed in your use case document. Now, use cases again are written by the testers for the testers, not necessarily for the use case documents are written by the developers and to be used by the developers. So this is to give the developers a good understanding of how to build a system and in what ways is that system going to be used by who, in what context, and all that. But then this becomes a wonderful input for testers as well. Now, in the absence of use case document, you would have something to compensate for that. Like you would have an older version of the application, or you would have a developer who will explain that. If the use case document is present, great, you can use it. But if it's not present, all the other alternatives do exist. And sometimes, so we talked about how there's a BRD, FRD, and then, a use case document. Sometimes all three might be the same thing. See, business requirements, they probably are a page long or something. So sometimes they incorporate that into functional requirement document itself. Going forward, they can incorporate that into, use cases also into the FRD document. So technically these have to be 3 separate documents, but some teams they just combine, and there will be just one requirement document that will contain both business, functional, and also the use cases. Any questions, team? Marin's question is, I think that's why we used outcome column. Outcome is the expected result. So the expected result, yes, it will tell you about what needs to happen. But when will that happen is only, determined by the final validation point. So figure out what will cause that validation to, be invoked on your system, and then go with it. Sure, I will send it to you. A little bit, what else? So yeah, this is the test step, and then the test data column. Now coming back to the test data column, here try and give the real-time data if you can again. Sometimes it's not very important. Let's say there's a name field and you have to write a 5-character name. Does it matter if I just say Swati or Sweta? It doesn't matter, because both of them are 5-character names. So for things like that, you can leave it as a generic 5-character name. You can just leave it like that. But if you want to, incorporate the exact date, you can. In some cases, you probably will have to get the exact test data. Let's say you're trying to check like a credit card cancellation function. If this is the operation that you're checking for, then in this case, you would need a credit card number that is already existing and is actually active currently. And if there are any other rules that it needs to satisfy, like if it needs to belong to a certain bank branch, or if it needs to, if it needs to have some funds cleared from it before the cancellation happens. So all of these conditions, if they exist for the test to be performed, it is important to talk to your developers, have that kind of data incorporated into the backend, and include that into your test data. So this is very, very important. Sometimes the data can get created based on the test condition, or sometimes the existing data can be retrieved. So let's say usually what happens is, I mean, one of the common practices that happens during testing is, let's say if there's a version 2 that is already in production. So the production application will have a UI, will have its database and its servers and all of those middle layer components. Now, if there's a version 3 that's going to get come up, and this is available for QA. So the typical practice would be that the UA would be new and you need some data, production like data. So what happens is an image of the production database is taken and hooked up here. So here you would have production like data, and it is now a matter of time for the QAs to actually find a credit card number that matches all the criteria for us. So sometimes data will be created by your developers and given to you, but sometimes an image of the database will directly be hooked to your QA database. At that point of time, either you can write your own SQL queries and find the data, or you can take the help of your developer, find out which table this information is going to be in, and they will help you find that out. So in any case, data preparation, the test data preparation, management, storing, all of that is definitely an integral part of test design phase. Make sense, team? Any questions? All right. The next column is the expected result. So there's not much to this. We talked about this already. So you have a choice between per step and for the entire test case. So this is up to you, however you want to use it. And the next column that is, again, this is an optional column. I personally think it is useful, especially if you are forcing a considerable amount of new testers. But then most companies, they don't really, follow this, but it's up to you. Now, post condition is this column that you add at the end of the test case. So this column is also a part of this test case during the test design phase itself. Now, post condition is merely educational. So this is only as an FYI basis, and this is not per test step, but it is for the entire test case. So like precondition, which is for the entire test case, not for each step. Similarly, post condition is also not for each step, it is for the entire test case. So as I said, this is for your information basis. This is strictly educational. This may be static or dynamic, doesn't matter. This is optional. And the significance of this column is that this is just to provide additional information to the tester to reinforce the expected result. Now let me give you an example. Let's say I'm trying to log into gmail.com. Okay, now I have an email address, a password, an OK and a cancel buttons. Reset also probably is there, but I don't, it doesn't matter. So when you click and use, when you enter the username and password and you click OK, the expected result, you would say that the user is logged in, correct? Now, is that the only thing that happens when the user is logged in, team? So in addition to that, what else do you think happens? URL and window changes. Yeah, so the states change. Yes, that is correct. Yes, website will get the cookies. Yeah, but I'm talking about the AUT perspective. So what will happen to the Gmail page? No, I mean, not the page or anything. So once the user logins, don't you think, I mean, we kind of check whether the user has been logged in or not. But once the user has logged in, what do you think happens here? That probably, inbox will be displayed. Or if you have, yeah, thank you. So you have the inbox, you can actually go to the photos, you can, log into your Gtalk Plus, or probably, all of that. So there are multiple things that happen once you log into the application. So yes, state does change, but the capabilities of the user also change. So post condition will kind of give you all that information. Probably not like completely, because you will not know unless you see the application on what needs to happen. But probably you'll write something like this: the inbox or login, and the inbox page is displayed on login, and the number of new or unread emails is shown in brackets, something like that. So what we are doing here is we are giving a little bit of additional information to the tester to actually reinforce the concept that the user has successfully logged in. Now this is, as I said, extremely optional. This is only for, this is like a additional checkpoint for the user. Now how do we use this? Is it something that has a dynamic implication on the test execution? That's something that we'll look at in tomorrow's section. So let me give you another example to make sure that you're all very clear on this. So let's write it for this one itself. So let's write it for this one, the deleting of the country. So I clicked on delete and the country is removed from the list. So post condition, what I'm going to write is, once the country is deleted, the list of countries auto adjusts itself on an alphabetic order basis. Now, is this directly the intention of the test case, to see if the list reorganizes itself or not? No, right? But then this is something that happens as an intrinsic step. So that is why post condition is here, to make sure that that kind of difference is apparent to us, and this is an educational information that lets the tester know a lot more about the application than from just stating the expected result. But expected result is always about whether or not the test objective is satisfied. So that is the use of post condition, and this is all the steps that are part of your test case document during test documentation section. That phase. But however, these are not the only columns that are part of your test cases. Going forward, there are also status fields, actual result field. Now, when you come to think of it, when can I say whether the test case is a pass or a fail, or if, in fact, to even say what the status of the test case is? I'll only be able to do that once I have the AUT in hand, when I actually perform this test case and then get a look at that. So status, while I'm designing the test case, then I'm in no way to set that. Same is the case with the actual result. So while I'm writing this test case, can I tell if the country is getting removed or not? I won't be able to say that unless I actually execute that test. So that is why these two status, or these two columns are usually incorporated into the test plan in the test execution phase, which we will talk about tomorrow. So this is all there is to know about test case columns team, and a slightly always out of all of these, the most important, I think, is the input steps, state transition, validation, or action points. There's one small other thing that I want to tell you, but before that, Deepthi had a question. She was asking me how to write test cases on functions as opposed to fields. So here is my take on that. See, I'm adding a country. Is that a function? Is that an operation, or is that a field level check that I'm performing? So Chandan's question is, these fields, are we going to create, or there's a set or form which we have to follow or fill? It could be both ways. In some teams, they already have a template where you just have to keep filling in your information, or your test cases as you create them. But if you're starting a new project, then you'll have to start from scratch, which means you will have to start incorporating these fields and create your own test case template. So it could be both ways. So Alka's question is, can you write the test case and test step for one requirement? So here's the thing, if the test scenario is validate the country add feature or function or action by the administrator, the corresponding test case would be this one. Okay. And the next thing that I was talking about is writing test case as opposed to function versus feature. Now, feature-wise test cases, if you ask me, are they not important? They are important. Let's say if there is a country name field. So when I have to add the country, I have to use the country name field, correct? So for this field, I can give like valid country name, which is an alpha, betical or, character-based string, or I can give a numeric string. I'm not sure, but country names, to my knowledge, they don't have numbers in them. So you can try that numeric field, and then you can try special characters, you can try an empty field, you can try something that is, so if it takes like 50 characters, you can try something that's 51. So all of these you're testing on this one field. So you're writing these test cases based on the field. On the other hand, if you're writing a test case, to actually, use that field to actually perform a bigger job, a task. So here the task is to add a country. So here you're not exactly focusing on the field. You're focusing on the operation or the combined action. So this kind of test cases, when you write them, those are function-based test cases. But if you write test cases just to test individual fields, those will become feature or, just field-based test cases. Now, if you want to ask me which one is beneficial to do, I would say try to first write all your function-based test cases, because in my experience, field-based test cases are mostly executed on an exploratory basis. Because let's face it, how is it humanly possible to write documents to test each and every small valid invalid data that can go into it? So a lot of times field level validations, they go on a non-documented basis. So practice writing based on functions, not fields. So if there is any other question that I haven't answered based on your assignments, please let me know. In the meantime, we will just go to the next topic. Any other questions, team? All right, so one other thing that I wanted to show you in the test case optimization, again, I wouldn't call it an optimization. This is some technique that I found useful. So if you can remember, I told you not to write test cases on search specifically. The reason why I did that is because search has one of these three ways in which this can go. One is the search can be valid, you'll see the results. The search criteria might be valid, but no results might be present. So the third situation is there is an invalid criteria, which means there are no results again. Or, in addition to that, there might be a notification message saying that you need to enter something correct. So these are all the situations that we're dealing with. Did we talk about this already, team? Yes? No? Okay. So in this case, what I like to do is I want to create something that I call a data table. So in the data table, what I'll do is I'll just write all the column names. So if now we have make, model, year, starting year, from year to year, all that, mileage, and then price, and then I would write result. So what I would do here is I would enter, let's say, a Toyota Camry, some, I don't know what year, 1990, 100K, price is say $5,000, and for this the result has to be displayed. So this is a valid result. Next, what I want to do is I want to just search based on make and model. So in this case also it's a valid search criteria, my result should come. The third case, I'll keep everything blank. In this case I should get the invalid result. So next I'll just search with the make, then I'll search with, so here there are different combinations that you can check. So with valid and invalid, and in the result you can just put one that is corresponding to it. So this way you can make your table with, again there will be like probably a tens or even hundreds of combinations, but choose the ones that are most likely to happen in real time. So this is how you can create a table. And how do you use this table? So to use this table, all you need to do is write a test case this way: precondition, data table is available. Or if you want to further optimize this, you can say that search page is launched. Now in the test step, what I would do is enter the data as per any column in the data table. So if the table has a specific name, you can include that, or you can provide a link to the table here, or any way you want to reference to the table. And then in the expected result, since this is a data entry step, there will not be any expected result. Going forward, you would click on search. Now here I would say the expected result, the result should be consistent with the result that is specified for the column or row actually. So this is how we can write just two steps and test how many ever conditions that there are in the data table. Now the advantages to this is, one, you're reducing the amount of work clearly, and the second advantage is when you are actually testing, it is easier to actually follow this table. And let's say I check the first step, I can simply change the color to denote that this has been executed. So it is very easy to kind of check and keep moving on further. This is how you can separate the steps and the table, and this technique in automation is called parameterization, but in manual testing it does not have a certain name. It's not even a standard. This is just a common best practice that I found useful, and I share with all the participants. Any questions? Does this make sense? All right, so give this a practice. So this technique is good for anything that has a lot of input fields on your screen. So this is good for creating account page. This is good for all of these pages where you have to enter a lot of data. There are different combinations to it and all that. So get some practice on this technique. It can be really handy in real time. So yeah, this is a little bit about test cases, a lot of detail. So this officially finishes the discussion on how to write test cases per se. There is still a few things that we'll discuss on test cases. So now would be a good time if you have any questions here. And as I told you last week, test cases are one of the things that we'll spend most of our time as testers on. And even when you become like test managers and test leads, we still have to contribute to writing test cases. So this is a task or a process that really pays to take some time to perfect. So get as much practice as you can, and then if you have questions, you're most welcome. So yeah, that's about basics about test cases. Now let's move to the test case optimization techniques. So there are like 5 of these test case optimization techniques. In addition to this, there's also risk analysis. Now let's start with boundary value analysis. Now, where do you see a practical use value to this test case optimization technique? So that's the very first question that we should ask ourselves. Now, usually participants will come to me and ask me, how will I know that I have to use this technique? Will somebody tell me, or how would I know? Now, nobody is going to tell you to use a certain technique to create your test case. But Srikanth, I see that your hand is raised. Did you have a question? Okay, I'm going to unmute you. So let me know whatever your question is. Team, we'll just take Srikanth's question and get right back to optimization techniques. Hi, Srikanth.
Yeah. What is the exact difference between test case and test scenario in the front of the interview?
Okay. Test scenario answers the question of what to test, whereas a test case will give you details of how to test. So were you there when we discussed the Coke tin example?
Yeah.
So that's exactly the thing. So when you have a requirement, you would try and figure out what to test in that requirement. So for I'm going to place you back on mute, but if you still have a question, just let me know.
That's okay.
Thank you. So when you have like a a requirement, let's say the requirement here is to schedule a training or create an account. Now in the create an account page, there are multiple things that you can check for. One is you can check for, is the account creation happening, whether or not you give valid information. And then can you create an account when you provide an already existing username? Can you create an account when you give multiple passwords or, mismatching passwords? When you give a birthday that, makes you lesser than 18 years of age. So the requirement is creation of a Google account, but there are multiple things that you would want to check. So those are what to test. So that will be your test scenarios. Test scenarios are one-liner definitions or what you would want to look in the application and evaluate eventually. But when it comes to test cases, if you see, these are how. Test cases are instruction based, which means it will give you the exact sequence of steps to follow in order to check the objective that you set for yourself during identifying the test scenarios. So the difference between test case and a test step is identifying what to test, and the next step, which is the test cases, is to write give instruction based rules on how to achieve a particular target on your application. Does that make sense, Srikanth? All right, so here's what I would say. I mean, I can understand, it might be a little bit overwhelming. So take your time to go back to the classes. And if you still have that question, then we will definitely, take it up and discuss it further. Okay, moving on. Test case optimization technique. So the question would normally come to me, who would tell me when I should optimize my test case, or who would tell me that I have to do a boundary value analysis or what? So that's a question that we will reserve for the end. We will take a look at that, but first let's learn the theory behind these techniques. So the first thing is boundary value analysis. Boundary value analysis tries to find or tries to target one special kind of errors or defects, and those errors are things that are caused by operators. So if anybody is from a development background or even non-computer science, all of us can really understand this. Now when we are talking about operators, we are talking about greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, not equal to, all of this. Now how hard do you think it is to actually replace this with this? Not so difficult, isn't it? So when it is less than or equal to, we might actually just replace it with less than. Now what is the implication of any of these operators getting mismatched? That's something we'll look at in a minute. Let's say there is an age limit on there's a program and there's a age limit on when you can join this. So if children that are less than 10 are not allowed. So if this is the rule that this site has to follow, so when you're registering, you have to enter an age field, and if you enter any number that is less than or equal to 10, then you will probably you'll probably not be qualified to join the sessions. So you'll have to be over 10. Now, how would a developer write this inside the code? Again, I'm not going to follow any particular programming language, just giving you an overall idea. So if age is greater than or greater than 10, then the yes branch of code will get executed, else the no branch of code will get executed, end if. Now what happens if I replace the greater than by less than? That is obviously going to do the exact opposite of what it's supposed to do. That means instead of allowing people over 10, it's going to allow people that are less than 10, which is, a detrimental effect. But even if you think that it's not going to be that similar, if age is greater than or equal to 10, if this is what, the developer has written. So what this means is people who are just 10 will still be able to get into the class, which is again against the requirement. On the other hand, if it's less than or equal to, again, there are all of these repercussions. So boundary value analysis tries to identify this kind of errors. And again, I wouldn't say that this has been my first-hand experience. I have never really come across, anything like this, but for some reason, testers are always instructed to look around these operator-based situations. Now, the easiest way would be to actually go into the code and verify it, but then we don't have the technical expertise, nor are we, built to do that. So what we would do instead is, we would choose data that would represent or that would invoke the exact parts of code. So what I would now do is, in the age field, I need to check the boundaries. I need to know that is this field taking something that is over 10 only. So the field value is 10 right now. I mean the the boundary or the cutoff age is 10. So what I would now do is I would choose a value data that is boundary plus 1, boundary itself, boundary minus 1. So this is what the boundary value analysis instructs us to do. So we are going to pick 11, we're going to pick 10 itself, and we're going to pick 9. So for 10 and 9, there should be a negative result. For 11, there should be a positive result. If this is what you're seeing, you're just looking at 3 in units of data. That means 3 values of data, but you're essentially making sure that the age field is 100% secure and it is working as intended. So boundary value analysis is applicable to anywhere the operators are in use. So you might think that the immediate application would apply only for numeric fields. It is true that there has to be some sort of a numeric basis to it, but let's say if this was a name field, and if it can take a character value that can be like 15 characters long. Now, even though this is a character field, the numeric data that we are interested in is 15, which is actually the length. So here you would choose a name that is 14 characters in length, 15 in length, and 16 in length. So if anybody will ask you, can we use boundary value analysis only for numeric fields? That's not true. You can use it for characters or numeric fields alike. But then again, you can actually use it for other fields also, but there has to be some sort of numeric basis to this. Otherwise, you'll not be able to calculate the low limit plus and minus 1. So that's boundary value analysis. So your requirement said less than 10 is not allowed, so 10 should be validated. Yeah, I mean, depending on the requirement, yes. But then, this is the general guideline, and then you will have to choose these 3 set of values to make sure that the boundary has been set concretely in the code. So this is boundary value analysis. Any questions on that? Yeah, this is just an example. I'm actually, giving you a ballpark here. Alright, so that's boundary value analysis. The next is equivalence partitioning. So boundary value, so you have to remember that do we have to do these values so do we have to write these, or can we do this in an exploratory test? Either ways. Sometimes teams are, they want to document what you're going to do as part of boundary value checking. So it's a standard that your team will follow. Then you will have to document that. But if you don't want to document that, if you're just doing exploratory testing, you come across a field that has a limit, then you can just do it in an exploratory manner. But the real takeaway from understanding these concepts is knowing that these concepts exist, that they exist for a particular reason, and knowing is the first step to actually implementing. So that's what we are going to learn by actually consciously looking at these techniques. So the next thing is, so there must be test case for every B. Yes. So again, you can actually use this method there. You can actually, write a table, separate the data, and you could do that. But yes, if you are writing a test case to check the boundary, then you will have to do 3 at least. The next is equivalence partitioning. I'll just write EP. Now, equivalence partitioning is a technique that comes in handy when you're dealing with a huge set of input data. Now, if you look at it closely, what we are doing here is in the search field also, when we are writing the test cases for search, what did we do? We actually, broke the result down into 3 categories, and we kind of chose data that will exploit and result in, one of these 3 results. So what we are doing is there are like million outcomes to, no, there are million data combinations to the search, but there are only 3 outcomes. So if you have at least tested one outcome each at least once, then that gives you a certain amount of confidence that the search is able to handle things. Now another example let me give you. Let's take a simple numeric, field. Let's say if this takes data from 0 to 1,000, 0 to 1,000. Now, if I have to test this field 100% accurately, I'll have to test for 1 to 1,000 numbers plus 0 itself. So that is 1,001 numbers. So instead of that, what I will do is I'll break this down into partitions based on a common criteria. My criteria here might be 0 to 9, they are 1-digit numbers. 10 to 99 are 2-digit numbers. 100 to 999, 3, and 1,000 would be my 4-digit number. So once I break this down into partitions, what I would do is I'd pick a value from each one of them. I'll pick 8, 33, 101, and the 1,000 itself. So instead of testing 1,001, I'll simply have to test these 4 and I'm done. So equivalence partitioning is applicable in a lot of situations, and this is an easy example. As opposed to boundary value analysis, equivalence partitioning does not necessarily have to have a numeric foundation. So let me explain to you this way. I'm going to clear this. So in the search table, in the search data table, let's say you have 115 columns. Now, for whatever reason, you don't have the time to test all the 115 data combinations. So what I would now do is, I would take a valid combination, invalid no result combination, and just a no result combination. So I'm actually breaking down these 115 columns of data into 3 common criteria. So what I would now do is, from all the valid pool, I'll just pick one column, one each. So if you want for additional measure, you can pick like 2 or 3, it's up to you. But you will actually deal with a smaller subset that represents the whole big partition. And you will just run these 3 on your application. And if it runs for these 3, then it should run for everything else. So that's the sort of assumption when it comes to equivalence partitioning. You will take your huge set of input data, break it down into logical sections based on common criteria, and from each section you will take a subset of data that is representative of the partition itself, and with that, when you test that, it's going to bring a level of efficiency, and you don't have to test every possible combination. You can just choose a limited data that you want to go for. Any questions, team? Okay. In this case, it is recommended to test boundary values like 0 and 1000 also. That's a great question, Emilio. Yes, sometimes you don't normally have to just use one technique on one field. You might have to use multiple techniques. So in cases like, when there exists a 0 to 1000 limit, there exists two boundaries here. There's a lower boundary and then there's an upper boundary. So you will partition into 1 digit, 2 digit, 3 digit, 4 digit. You will take 4 values. In addition to that, you would take lower boundary plus 1, lower boundary itself, lower boundary minus 1, and then you will also pick upper boundary plus 1, upper boundary itself, and upper boundary minus 1. So you're looking at 7 plus 3 plus 3, 13 sets of data to test this field completely, accurately, and with enhanced levels of confidence that this field will work. So yes, that's a great question. Thank you. All right. The next thing is error guessing. There is really not a lot of depth to this. Error guessing is very informal, and it actually refers to a technique where testers use their intuition to come up with few kinds of test conditions. Now here's what I'm saying. Let's say there's a date field, right? So in the date field, whenever there are date fields for a lot of reasons. One, date of birth while account creation. There is, let's say, if a bill is generated, there are due dates and all that. So date fields are used very, very commonly. So when I'm scheduling a meeting, I have to set a date for the meeting, all of that. So anytime there's a date field, you probably want to check for what happens or whether it accepts February 31st or 30 or 28, 29, all that. Correct? So you might want to just see what happens. And also when it comes to text boxes, does anybody tell you that, as I was saying earlier, country name? So now I believe that country names don't have numbers. So what will I do? In the name, I'll probably include some number. Right? So this kind of, few things that come to your mind, and you just use this data to test this application, that becomes error guessing. It's not formal. It's just based on testers' intuition, based on your experience, based on your real life experience as users, not necessarily as testers, that will guide what kind of data you choose to incorporate into your test in order to see how well it performs and what kind of boundaries exist to it. So that's error guessing. No formality again here. You may or may not document it. It's up to you. Now that brings us to state transition diagram. So let me quickly get that diagram here. So one more this is a brief state transition diagram. Let me explain what I mean by that. Now, when we are talking about state transition diagrams, it is very important to understand that a state transition diagram is not for the AUT. Now, what I mean by that is, earlier we were talking about test cases, and we talked about how certain steps, they cause a state transition. Correct? So when we are talking about the state transition here, we are talking about URL changes, notification messages coming up. So all of this is happening to the AUT. So AUT might move from one page to another. It might still be in the same page, but something new might come up, something existing might not be, existing anymore. So all of these things are state transitions with respect to the AUT. But when you are drawing up a state transition diagram, you're not exactly worried about the AUT. You're actually basing this on the entity around which the business revolves. Now, what do I mean by that? So, when you look at Expedia.com or Hotwire or Travelodge, Make My Trip, any of these ticketing sites. Now, they will have a search option. confirmation, where you enter the information, confirmation, and then you issue your tickets, all of that. So these are page 1, 2, 3 of the AUT itself. But at the core of this business is tickets. Correct? So tickets is the entity around which this business revolves. Similarly, for our Car Guruji, there is also a search. There's a place where you can, log in as a dealer, send a message, and, view the details, do whatnot. But again, the business revolves around cars, or the car sales, when you look at car as a product, as a commodity. So here, the product or the entity is the car. So similarly, when you look at any business for that matter, there's always that central entity around which this entire business revolves. So there's also the courier service. So when you're talking about courier or, these carriers, freight carriers, now their business, yes, you make a shipment, you track a shipment and all that. But the core entity is the shipment itself. So that is something that you will need to identify first and foremost in order to be able to draw a state transition diagram. Now, once you identify the entity, you will have to think about the states of this entity. Now, here we are not talking about different pages. We are talking about the different stages this entity can be in. So let's take our Car Guruji site example. Here it is cars, correct? That's the entity. So when the dealer brings it in, the car is in the inventory. Now, once an inquiry is made or once somebody reserves it, the car goes to the reserved state. And from the reserved state, they might choose to not buy it anymore. So it might get into cancel state. Or from the reserved state, people might actually buy it. So it might go into the sold state. So you see there are different states, and in the state transition diagram, the circles will denote the states. The arrows will denote the action that causes the transition. So let me give you another example of Expedia.com. Ticketing is something that we are all very familiar with as general users. So that will probably, help us understand this topic better. So initially the ticket is in the making mode. So nobody has, you're searching, you're entering your information, you're still, trying to make up your mind. Now then you probably will cancel it right then and there because you're not satisfied with the dates, or if you're just looking at it for your information. Or you could actually pay for the ticket. In which case, so if you make a payment, the ticket will go into the paid state. So if you just cancel or delete or not confirm, then it goes to the cancellation. So after you pay, you can still go back to canceling your ticket, in which case you're out of the system already. But if you've paid, you can actually get your ticket issued. So some companies, they'll allow you to cancel the ticket even after it's issued, or sometimes there is that option not available. But anyways, and then you can use the ticket, which means it's out of the system again. So the first way the very first thing is to actually draw the state transition diagram. You might be wondering why. I mean, all of this makes sense, but why do we even have to draw a state transition diagram? The reason why state transition diagrams can be very helpful is, first and foremost, they are business centric. So here you're not looking at screens, you're not looking at fields, you're not looking at functions. You're looking at businesses. You're looking at how things happen in an end-to-end manner. So that can be extremely crucial when you're writing your test cases. On the other hand, when you don't have enough time to test each and every page on your application thoroughly, each and every function on your application thoroughly, what you can do is you can come back to your state transition diagram, and here is how you can use it. So when you look at this diagram, this is your first end-to-end flow. Making a ticket, canceling it. The second one would be entering, paying, canceling. The third one would be entering, paying, getting the ticket issuing, using it. And the fourth one would be entering, paying, issuing the ticket, and going back to canceling. So when you don't have enough time to test each and every field, each and every function of the application, all you have to do is test 4 end-to-end flows, and that will give you enough confidence on the application to say that this will function well in most business scenarios, because the entity is going through fine through the entire system, and It is business centric, and this is giving us a clear-cut idea of what needs to happen, and in a way you're actually doing an end-to-end test. So state transition diagrams, when you don't have enough time, will help you optimize the extent of testing that you do, at the same time orienting ourselves towards the end business itself. So yeah, this is state transition diagrams. Any questions? Chandan, doing flow charting. In a way, yes, this is, but flow charts are especially used to denote the flow of data or the sequence or processing. But this is just about the different states. There is a slight differentiation, but I kind of understand, where you're coming from with that analogy. But flowcharts are also a topic of discussion in the class, I think tomorrow. So we'll discuss that and we'll see if there are any obvious differences. So are these drawn in any type of document? That's a good question. Now, do you, first and foremost, do testers draw this? What do you think, team? Do you think testers draw this kind of diagrams? Yes or no? So there's a mixed opinion. Okay. Now let me ask you a different question. So do you think testers can draw this diagram? Yes or no? If you are given a chance, will you draw it? Clearly, yes. Now, it's not a matter of capability, whether or not we can draw this or not, but it's just a matter of who will draw it and why. Now, the thing is, when there is a complex business system that needs to be built, it has to be built first before you have to test it. So when developers are actually trying to build a complex system that goes through many states and many transitions, they are the ones who will actually initiate and create a state transition diagram if there's a need for it. So in case you're looking for a state transition diagram, or if you need to use it for any circumstances that we talked about earlier, then the best place to find that, if it exists, would be your technical design document. So the chances that this document is already available, those are high, and this will be available in your technical design document. So you could it's just a matter of probably just going back and taking a look at it. But in case if it's not available and you really see a worth to it, if you feel like this can be really useful, then it's just a matter of minutes and a good understanding of the system to actually sit down and be able to create this document. But 90% of the time we don't have to do this. It will probably be pre-available. Okay. Any questions on how to use it? I mean, how to draw it is a secondary step. As I said, it will already be available, but how to use it, so is that making sense, why we use it and how we use it? All right. So the next thing, Emilio's question is, as I understand, right, state transition diagram is a shortcut alternative. If you have the time, what would be the testing techniques instead, or it really is a technique required to test states? So the last part of her question, is it really a technique required to test states? No, it's not really about the individual states. It's about how it's working end-to-end as a function. So if this diagram is a shortcut alternative, then what would normally be the case? The normal case would be actually writing down these individual test cases for each and every function and then testing it. So even if you test these individual functions, at the end of the day during UAT, the users will be interested in testing the end-to-end flows. So if QA team is responsible for creating those end-to-end flow test cases for UAT, then we can definitely use the state transition diagram. But the alternative would be to test each and every function like this, individual test cases in detailed way. So is it to test the business rules then? Yes, absolutely. To understand the business itself, not necessarily focusing on features or functions or fields for that matter. Okay, so the last decision table that we'll look at is, the last test case optimization technique that we'll look at is the decision table. Now this is very, very simple, and there are like plenty of examples on the internet, so I'll just try to keep this simple. Now decision tables they come in handy in a special kind of a circumstance, and that is when there are lots of types of input data, and on different inputs different kind of processing happens. So here when you look at this table, so if this is a table that let's assume is going to be used for a loan management system, a banking application where loan management happens. So if the amount is, $4,000, it's pretty much tax-free or interest-free. So if the loan amount, the principal amount is over 4,000, and the amount that is over 4,000, if that's less than 1,500, then the first 4,000 is, tax free or interest free, and the next amount that's over 4,000 and less than 5,500, that is going to be taxed at a percentage of 10. So here you see there are different kinds of inputs that come into the system, and based on the different inputs, there's a complex processing or calculation that's happening, computing that's happening, using different parameters. Now the real use value of decision table is when you do a comparative analysis of the information being represented in a table format versus it being represented in a paragraphic format. Now let's just try to write these 2 columns worth of this content into paragraphs. Please bear with me, team. So you see how hard was that to actually write it, and much less read it and understand it. So whenever there's a complex business logic, a lot of data that goes into it, it is preferred that that kind of information is represented in a decision table. So decision table is easy to draw up, and if you need more references or more examples of it, you can actually check in Google. It's pretty straightforward. Now again, the same logic that applied to now from a table like this, do you think it's easier to write test cases as opposed to writing it from a paragraph that's explaining the content? Do you see the use value here, team? Yes or no? Yeah, so it's very easy to write your test cases. But having said that, when an application has a complex business logic or a computation logic that needs to be built, now building always comes before testing. So that is why if your development team is building an application that is this complicated, then there are chances that they'll draw up the decision table already and keep it handy. So again, technical design document will be a good place for you to check if the decision table is available or not. So if it's available, it makes our life easy. It is much easier to write. It's much easier to write test cases or test conditions from the decision table as opposed to writing it from a paragraph. And actually, paragraph writing is pretty complex. I tried, and if you've seen how much time that has taken, and what if I did not understand something right, and written something again incorrect there, then that'll again mess up the whole process of creation, building, and all that. So decision table is definitely a go-to method. It's not really about how to create it that we're trying to learn here. It is about how to interpret it and what circumstances it might be present and to look for it in order to use it. So these are the 5 basic test case optimization techniques. Now in the beginning, we talked about how will we know which one to use when. Now there will not be any instructions or your test lead or nobody will tell you that hey, use the boundary value analysis. Now knowing that these kind of techniques exist, it is for testers to actually pick and choose on what is important for them and what is relevant for them. So to enable that, all these techniques are available and we learn them, and when need comes up and when you have to use this, you will be able to use this effectively. There are no guarantees that all of these techniques have to be used for a project. Even some of them have to be used for the project. So they are completely optional. They don't have to be used. But when there is a need, it is for us to know that these things exist in order to help us with whatever testing we are looking at. And the other various ways, especially boundary values analysis and equivalence partitioning, these are questions that might come up in your certification examination, especially for ISTQB. So give it a good reading. There are some sample problems in all the documents that Vijay has shared with you. Try one or two. If it's making sense, that's fine. But if you have any difficulty, bring it to the class. We'll try to solve them as a team. Okay? Now coming to the risk analysis. Now risk analysis, again, testing teams always are under this huge risk that we don't have enough time. Now we did talk about risk analysis last week when we were discussing the test plan. Correct? Now that risk analysis is project based. So there we are trying to make an assessment of what can go wrong for the entire testing or QA project. But right now, when we are in the test design phase, and if we have to perform a risk analysis, this is for the AUT. Now, what is the event that we are preparing for with the risk analysis here? The event that we are preparing for is that we will not have as much time or resources to test as much as we would like. So this is the kind of problem that we are trying to prepare ourselves for. So what goes on in risk-based analysis is that all the modules are listed, or components, modules, constituent elements of your application are listed out. This is basically risk identification. Now on your AUT, if the particular functionality exists, there is a good chance, equal chance of it working and not working. So every functionality is a risk in itself. So you cannot say that a particular functionality will work 100%. It may not. So the first step to risk identification would be identifying all the modules. So I would say admin module, dealer module, visitor module, or any other modules that you might have. So you just list out all the modules first. And the next step would be, so again, the risk process itself is the same. The reason why we are doing it and at what stage, what are we trying to achieve, those are different. So the second step is to assign risk impact analysis. So in the risk impact analysis, as always, the probability and impact are figured out. So once you have all the modules listed, you will have to assign the probability and impact values. Now probability and impact, again, you'll have to come up with a common standard. So 1 to 5. 1 is least probable, 5 is most probable, or you can go with high, medium, low, any way you like. I normally prefer the number point system. So let's say admin, the importance is 5, the impact if it fails is 5, the probability of the dealer module failing is probably 1. How can you make this number? How can you make this judgment on what values to assign here? So what the second step is in this process, you will share this with all the teams. Now when it comes to the testing team, yes, it is, the AUT becomes a tester's responsibility. But before that, who do you think knows about the application best? To start with, BAs know the application best, and then the development teams know the application best. And then, of course, QAs also read the documentation and everything, so we know best. But then, when you look at it from a business perspective, who will know best on, what will be the impact of failure of a particular feature? It is basically the client, and to a certain extent the project manager, because if the admin module took like 2 months to build, and if that is what fails, the impact probably will not be how bad it is for the system, but it might be really bad for the project itself. It might again delay you for the next 2 months. So the client and the project manager also have a lot of insights to share in this area. So what happens is 5 teams are given this table. So each team will come up with their values. So let's say the QA team. I'm just going to assign some random numbers. Does not mean that they are accurate. So just work with me here. So let's say these are the values that the QA team thinks. Based on that, what I would do is I would calculate what I call the risk factor. Now risk factor is just a multiplication of both probability and impact. So this is 3, 8, and 1. So similarly, I would have 5 tables like this. From the client, from the business analyst, and developers. It is especially important to take the developers' input on this because they have built this system. So let's say admin module has not been integration tested at all. In a hurry, they just put it together and they just sent it to QA. So they will be able to tell you that which module might need a lot of attention. So this way you will come up with different values. So let's say these teams have assigned again, I'm just giving random numbers. Please work with me. So this is how you'll have like different numbers, different risk factor numbers. So impact analysis is, first assigning probability and impact, sharing it with the teams, and once all the teams have given their ranking, you calculate the risk factor. Based on the risk factor, now I have 5 ones, right? So I'm going to just take an average of all 5 risk factor values that are received from this. How come we come up with this? So this is just a number that we assign. Probability, if it is most likely to fail, you will say assign 1. If it is if it is least likely to fail, assign 1. If it's most likely to fail, assign 5. So these are values that are predetermined, and each one will give a certain ranking of what they think is appropriate, and risk factor is calculated as probability into impact. Okay, so that's how you come up with the risk factor number. Average of all the risk factor numbers is taken. So let's say this is the average. So average is nothing but adding all of them and dividing it with 5. So if these are, if these are the final risk factor values that you are looking at, then what I would do is, now I know that dealer is the module that is most likely to fail and most important, followed by admin and followed by visitor. So this ends the risk impact analysis. Next comes the risk mitigation. Now risk mitigation plans, there are no every team handles this differently. So there are different ways to go about it. I can say that I'll just do some exploratory testing on admin and visitor modules because they are not likely to fail and they don't have a lot of impact. So I'll just do an exploratory testing on them, but I'll do documented systematic testing on the dealer module because that is the most risky at this point of time. So different teams will come up with different mitigation plans, but this will just give an idea of how important it is to address a certain thing beforehand. Now this is only a contingency plan team. It is not something that happens like normally. So this is also called risk-based testing, and this method has a higher chance of success because QA team is not just giving their opinion. We are taking everybody's opinion, so this has a higher chance of success. And this process, it might look like there's a lot of steps to this and all, but typically this happens in a 1 hour meeting or something where everybody is called, and on a whiteboard you kind of write everybody's values and you kind of calculate as you go. So this is, even though this has some steps and it's a formal process, it does not take that long in the real time, and really it is worth investing that 1 hour, because this way you're coming up with not a random strategy but focused strategy on how you can make this work and what are the things that you can do in order to make this work. So that's risk-based technique, and any questions, anything you want to talk about, we can take that. For risk analysis purposes, who defines what a module is in the AUT? It has to come from the TDD also? No. For the first part of your question, who defines the modules? That is something that you can bring from your test scenarios, or how your functional requirement document is broken down. For example, if I'm using the UBS FRD document I showed you earlier, now I would say my modules will be all of this: placing an order, proceeding to checkout. So any organization method that you found useful, that you have been using so far, you can use them as the modules. Also, risk analysis is tend to check functional requirements fail. What if other ones do? You can incorporate that as well. Let's say you want to incorporate the database component to this, or if you want to incorporate the server component to this, you are free to do that. So will the developer define the modules, then the testers test the integration? Not necessarily. I'm not saying that you have to pick it from here. So say if you've had a test plan where you have actually broken down your modules, you can use that. Some way to actually deal with the application, break it down into constituent elements. It does not have to be a developer or a tester. Some common ground that you all agree on. Okay, so given the time, I don't think we can do stress testing and traceability. I wasn't even planning for that. So probably tomorrow we'll start with these topics, and we'll get into test execution more on that later. And Tina, what was your question? You can let me know now. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Feel free to let me know, team. We do have another good 8 minutes, so we can discuss all your questions. And Srikanth and Alka, you seem to have a little bit of a difficulty with, of course you had a question. I wouldn't necessarily come to the conclusion that there is a difficulty. So just go through that, explore it a little more. If we need to rediscuss that that part, we can definitely do that. And Tina, I received your email, on the test plan document. That's something I would like to take up tomorrow, because I'm not ready with the test plan and I would rather not scroll it, look for it and all that. So I would have it ready for you tomorrow. And moreover, these are questions that can be answered, via email. So I think I'll just go through that. I'll just go ahead and do that. But in the meantime, if you have questions, Tina, don't wait until the end of the class. Now is a good time to post that. And Manish, what is a way to practice writing test cases? Just getting hands-on with it. Now, does this happen to anybody when you're testing something? Are you dealing with an influx of ideas where you keep thinking about, I need to test this, I need to test that? Are there multiple thoughts coming up to test just one thing? That's happening, correct? So here's what I would suggest doing. So when this happens, that's actually a good sign. So we are actually getting into it. Now at that point of time, de-scope your work. Now what I'm trying to tell you is, so in the real-time environment, let's say I'm testing GoToTraining. I wouldn't test scheduling, I wouldn't test recording, I wouldn't test all the options at once. I would probably be responsible for one thing. So what I would tell you to do at this point of time is, so if you're testing just a field and you're getting multiple ideas, 10 ideas, follow them through. Write all 10 test cases without worrying about, is this productive or counterproductive? Are these test cases going to be useful or not? In the real time, will I write test cases like that? All that's immaterial. If a test needs to be performed, it needs to be documented in an instruction-wise mechanism. So at this point of time, don't worry about, things meaning something or making some sort of concrete sense. So get head on with it. With everything, there is a certain, commitment that you'll have to show. So when I started reading books, my instructor used to tell me, read at least 15 minutes every day. So that's the sort of thing I would tell you. Also write at least 10 test cases every day without worrying about their use value or anything else. And I'm here to, check, review, and get back, give you my opinion if you would like that. So that's all. I mean, I really don't have a lot of insight in it, but practice is all I would suggest. Or something like in rephrasing, or should I get the no, your concept is correct, Tina. No, you don't have any issues concept wise. Just, don't give instructions to the users, that's all. But if there's any data that needs to be ready, if there's any websites that need to be launched ahead of time, just make sure you incorporate that. So again, practice and you'll get that right, I'm sure. So today's assignment, I would like you all to incorporate the post condition column and practice all of these techniques that we talked about. We talked about data tables, we talked about all of these optimization techniques. I know for a fact that these are two things that we can definitely practice, if not for anything else. So give that a try and let me know how you feel about it, or if you found anything to work with to begin with, and we'll take it forward. Okay. So tomorrow we'll start with stress testing. We'll talk about traceability matrix, and then we'll get into test execution. Test execution has status reporting and all of those cool concepts. So we'll discuss those tomorrow. And on Wednesday, we'll discuss defects and UAT. And that would actually wind up all manual testing core concepts. That was fast, wasn't it? Yep, I understand. But for the next 2 weeks, we will reinforce all these concepts and we'll discuss, different tools through which we will reiterate all the things that we've been learning. So yeah, that's the plan. So any questions? I'm here for another few minutes, so you can just let me know. If you have no questions, you can feel free to drop off, and I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one, team. Bye-bye. So validation test steps you already have written. It's not different from any other step for that matter. So you see here, when I say enter the country name, what I'm doing here is I'm clicking OK after I enter the country name. So some operation I'm performing in order to submit this form. So here when I'm writing last name, I'm just coming out of that column. So that is an operation that works as a validation step. Here I'm entering all the other information, clicking on continue. The step that I write in order to click on continue, that will be my validation step is all. So it is just any other step except that it is the last step that will cause this validation to get triggered. Make sense, Tina? Okay.